Hello and welcome to another one of our Balancing Beliefs videos. As always, this is produced by Professor Javier Garcia Oliva and Dr. Helen Hall. However, this is a little different from a lot of our videos. It's in the main part a recording of a workshop which we were lucky enough to have Adam Giles from the Great Escape Rooms come and deliver, talking about how escape rooms as an experience, as a vehicle, can be useful in the teaching of undergraduates in universities and also with public engagement exercises. This workshop was sponsored by the Aspect Network and was hosted by the Centre for Rights and Justice at Nottingham Trent University. I hope that you find it useful, and if you are interested or inspired by anything that you hear, details of some links where you can find a little bit more are in a card at the end of the video. Thank you.
14, as Juan says.
Okay, a very warm welcome to everyone who is joining us both now live and also posterity out there who are going to be watching this. This is one of two sister events that we're running around escape rooms as a game-based learning experience. This one is being hosted from Nottingham Trent University with my colleague from Manchester University, Professor Javier Oliva, and myself. I'm Dr. Helen Hall, and Javier is going to tell us a little bit about what we're here and what we're going to do.
That's very well. Thank you very much for attending and for joining us today. I'm delighted to see you here. And obviously, I'm delighted to share with you a very interesting workshop that's going to focus on escape room as an instrument to obviously help us to disseminate our research and also to enhance our teaching. Obviously, both areas, teaching and research, are essential to academic life, and we need to be creative, and it's quite important that we start thinking of ways to certainly make sure that we reach out to the wider community, society, and also that we enrich our students' experience. These workshops, as Helen has indicated, are part of a wider project on educational games, and they are commercialization potential, which was funded by Aspect. Therefore, we're extremely grateful to them for their support. And today we're talking about a particular form of game-based learning and how academics can use them independently of commercialization in the short term. Helen and I are going to just deliver a very, very brief presentation for 10 minutes max, and that's going to be followed by a contribution by Aaron Giles from the Greater Escape Rooms. Obviously, we're all aware of the exciting possibilities that escape rooms offer. They're very enticing, very engaging, but Aaron is going to explain to us, and this is the most exciting part of this workshop, how obviously escape rooms could be used in an academic context. And we very much look forward to Aaron's presentation. Then I promise that the presentation that Helen and I are delivering is very brief, and we're going to highlight the structure of today's workshop. We have a very brief presentation to share with you before handing it over to Aaron. Can you see it? Can you all see it? Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The scope of this talk is obviously the use of escape rooms in an academic context, as indicated, and obviously how to share research and its relationship with teaching and public engagement, and using escape rooms as a creative possibility for dissemination. And we're going to use a case study of a fascinating lady we came across in our research a while ago, Margaret Cavendish, the writer of The Blazing War, which is a brilliant book, and Helen is going to tell you a little bit about it in a minute. And then, as I said, this is going to be followed by a talk on building an escape room from Aaron Giles of The Great Escape Room. Helen and I have been writing together, and also we work very closely with Thomas Lewis, who is here today, on a wide range of areas, including legal history, law and religion, and belief, the supernatural, and the development of human rights, constitutions. I am a public lawyer myself. I have an interest in constitutional law, and I approach all these areas from a public law angle. Helen is a private lawyer herself, then we complement each other in that sense, and we look at different areas from both a public law and a private law perspective. Like all academics, we're excited about our work, and we are very keen to share it with our students and the wider world. Obviously, some of it fits very well with conventional routes, is suitable for incorporating into teaching, or others, on other occasions, it can provide substance for contributions to law commission consultations, reports, etc. But what about the rest? And this is an important question that we academics need to face. There are some elements of our work which we believe have value and interest, but which probably we believe that, I hope so, but which do not necessarily fit with traditional modes of dissemination. Does that mean that sort of research is worthless? Certainly not. This does not mean that they do not have great value and potential in respect of impact, but may require some creativity in finding the right means of communication. Therefore, research is an important part of our task as academics, but certainly we should never forget the significance of teaching, which is equally important. Therefore, engaging with research and scholarship, we certainly genuinely believe that can enrich student experience and academic performance. But we need to be fully aware of the challenges ahead of us in British academia in 2021. Students are often reluctant to spend time on areas which only indirectly rather than directly relate to their assessment, and they may feel, understandably, it goes without saying, very stressed out, overburdened, or reluctant to take on more reading. Again, finding alternatives to giving them yet another article to read can have benefits. And what alternatives can we think of? Well, Helen and I, and also with Thomas, we have been working very closely on this in the last few years. We've been exploring, and this was part of the project that was generally funded by ASPEC, as I mentioned earlier. We have been exploring game-based learning as a means of sharing research and teaching more generally. Escape rooms are one exciting possibility in this arena, and that is the reason why we're holding this workshop in NTU, in Nottingham Trent University today. We're going to discuss our work on Margaret Cavendish, and that will be followed, as I mentioned earlier, by Aaron's contribution. Who was this fascinating lady in the 17th century? She was born in 1623. She passed away only 50 years later. Then she had a very short life, but she was a very intriguing, very engaging, and a very, very clever woman. She was fascinated by philosophy and what we would nowadays call science, but at that stage was known as natural philosophy. As a woman, regrettably, obviously we have progressed for the better big time in the last few centuries, and there is still some very regrettable examples of discrimination against people on the grounds of their gender and race and sexual orientation and so on, even nowadays. But clearly that was a blatant example of discrimination in the 17th century against women. As a woman, she was excluded from university and formal academic discourse. She attended meetings of the Royal Society that was founded in 1660, but she was not permitted to become a member because, shockingly, women were not admitted in this society until 1945. However, she was a persistent, she was a hardworking, she was very dedicated. Then, not to be defeated, Margaret self-published her works and sent them to people whom she thought would benefit from reading them. and she aimed high, people such as Thomas Hobbes. Then she was married to the Duke of Newcastle. She was a Duchess of Newcastle, and she was obviously very, very wealthy. She had money and social status, but even very wealthy women, this wouldn't be sufficient to compel male contemporaries to take her seriously. In fairness to the Duke of Newcastle, he was extremely supportive of his wife's science and his wife's knowledge and interest, but that didn't suffice at that stage, as I mentioned. Then what did Margaret do? She found a very creative way to make her voice heard, and she wrote it. This is one of her novels, The Blazing World, which is a novel which she uses as a vehicle to share her ideas about philosophy and science. And then Helen Hall is now going to tell us much more about, just briefly, before we hand over to Aaron, about The Blazing World.
Thank you very much for that passionate introduction to Margaret Cavendish. Really, The Blazing World is a remarkable book in lots of ways, and it couldn't be more relevant for this kind of context because it's an example of someone in the early modern period using a playful and creative way of talking to people, using narratives and a kind of leisure activity to educate, to engage in dialogue, to get her ideas out into the public square. And it's quite humbling, really, that we're following in her footsteps. And of course, here in Nottinghamshire, we're not very far away from where she lived with her husband in the sort of Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire borders. Anyway, to return to my brief, the plot of The Blazing World. It's quite remarkable, and it was written before most of the great novels that we're familiar with, whether or not we enjoyed A-level English if we did it. The plot begins with a young woman who is alone on a beach, and she is enjoying her time at the seaside looking at seashells. Interestingly too, Margaret lived not very far away from another great scientist, of course, Isaac Newton, who famously talks about the image of wandering along the beach. So the book begins with a woman who's alone on a beach, and she's kidnapped by an evil, cynical suitor who wants to take her away for his own purposes. It says a lot, really, that this kind of violence against women is just taken as entirely standard. I've got someone I'm going to try and admit without doing anything awful to the record. Okay, so I'll just pause for a minute. Are they in? I think? Okay, great. Sorry, it just seems a bit mean not to make sure that they're okay. All right, so back to the plot of The Blazing World. Our heroine, alone on the beach, kidnapped by a cynical suitor. She's dragged on board his ship, and he's in a great hurry to get her far away from her family and anyone who might help and rescue her. In his enthusiasm, he over-eggs the pudding massively and sails to the North Pole, where he and his evil servant crew all conveniently freeze to death. Margaret kind of admits in the book that this plot doesn't make a great deal of sense. It's quite tongue-in-cheek. There isn't really a good explanation as to why the heroine doesn't also freeze to death. We're effectively told that she's just too good and too beautiful to die in that way. She's not destined to become a popsicle. So she does not die, and she is alone and drifting in a ship full of corpses in the polar night. And just when you think this bad day couldn't get any worse, she sees that there are large bears, I've always imagined them as polar bears, swimming towards her and this presumably delectable cargo of meat, which must have been somewhat alarming, to say the least of it. And bear in mind too that the North Pole at this point was a very mysterious place. It was somewhere that actually humans, or at least certainly white Europeans, didn't successfully explore until the 20th century. And we're not quite sure how successful any was in getting there. So it's this place of mystery. And it turns out that her ship has moved through a portal. and that the reason these bear-like creatures are swimming towards her is that she is no longer in the earthly world where she grew up. She has moved into the blazing world. And these bears turned out not to be quite, they're bears, Jim, but not as we know it. They are able to talk and communicate. They are kind and benevolent. And actually, it eventually turns out that they are the scientists, in fact, in their community. And they start to introduce her into this world that she's stumbled into. And again, this is such a familiar trope to us. You know, we've grown up with ideas about, you know, Narnia or various other books, but this is one of the first times that something like this has been done, because she encounters a world that is populated with talking animals and mythical creatures. And they've all got their own expertise. So, for instance, in this world, spiders are the ones who do maths. Satyrs are doctors, parrots are orators, and for reasons that are slightly mysterious, giants are the ones in charge of architecture. Interestingly, this is a very happy, very successful society. Margaret makes the point of saying that this is largely because they are governed by an emperor and everybody is wise enough to accept this. If you know anything about Margaret, she was the wife of a general on the royalist side in the Civil War, and obviously when that didn't go so well for the royalists, she spent time in exile. Oh, well, her party, in fairness, she wasn't married to said person at the time. But in the blazing world, there is very much this message of an ordered society where everybody obeys authority, particularly royal authority, which is handy for our heroine, because the human emperor, in fact, when he meets her, falls conveniently and madly in love and marries her and makes her the empress. This seems to work from a genetic point of view. As far as we can tell, the humans in the blazing world are very similar to the humans in our world physically, except for the fact they're specifically told that they don't have any of the kind of skin tones you find in this world. And she describes, you know, human skin tones, interestingly, purely in terms of colour. There's no concept of race in Margaret's thinking, really. But in the blazing world, people either have skin in primary colours or gold or metal. So she has some species of very colourful husband, and better than that even, he's quite lazy. And when he has this beautiful empress, he says, okay, right then, you can take charge of the world for me. I can't be bothered with any of this ruling stuff. So the heroine of the novel finds herself basically, you know, with the car keys to the world. She can do whatever she likes, which for a woman in the 17th century was amazing, even as an imaginative concept. And what does this heroine do with all this freedom that she suddenly acquired, this freedom that in real life, as we've heard from Javier, was denied to her, and denied to her by force of law and politics? She spends her time going around talking to the scientists and the philosophers. And this, of course, is a very good way that Margaret, as the author, of course, can get some of her theories out there and talk about some of the ideas that she wants to put on the table. I think it's fair to say that the philosophy in the book is quite hard going, and obviously the science reflects sort of natural philosophy of the early modern period. But even though that might be hard work, there are some absolutely amazing gems of narrative within this. She discovers at one stage that her home world, from where she's come, is being invaded by a hostile army. She contacts various ethereal spirits who tell her what's going on in the earthly world, and she decides she has to rush back. But in order to avoid freezing to death, she goes back in a submarine, which is absolutely amazing. You know, this is a long, long time. People are very impressed by the things that Jules Verne talked about in the 19th century, but this is someone imagining submarines going under polar ice. Way back in the early modern period, and she goes and she in fact liberates her family back in the earthly world. And although this point isn't made explicitly, you can't help thinking there is a foreshadowing of a sense of wanting a greater sort of liberation. Margaret certainly does acknowledge the confines, really, of the reality of her own life and the life of other women. But instead of despairing about it, within this novel, she finds an imaginative way of having freedom. And also, she issues a very explicit invitation to her readers. She says that I've now got this world where I can be an empress, but if you are fed up with your own life and you'd also like to be ruler of an entire world, well, what's stopping you people? Go and create your own world if that's what you want to do. So Javier, as you said, and I have been writing and thinking about human rights in lots of contexts. And we found Margaret's story really inspiring and her narrative incredibly enticing. And we also found it a huge shame that it's not much better known than it in fact is. And we thought that this would be a really wonderful backdrop and a really great vehicle for different kinds of creative, experimental, playful learning and modes of engagement, which is why we thought it would be really interesting to have an escape room as a sort of case study of something that might do for the escape room talk. So without any further ado, unless there's anything Javi would like to add to our bit, no? Okay, I'm going to now try to be very brave and manage to stop sharing the screen and temporarily make Aaron host so that he can share his own presentation. Hoping that I don't do the classic zeitgeisty thing of accidentally kicking everybody out. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you now, Aaron, should have the power.
Oh, fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'm Aaron, not John Blacklock, as my screen says. So, oh, we're working. Fantastic. It's always a nerve-wracking part, isn't it? Okay. So a little background on me. I work at the Great Escape Game. I'm the head of development there, so head of creative development. I've been designing escape rooms for 7 years now. Escape rooms have been in the UK for 8 years, so there's only been about a year of the industry where I haven't been making them. And there's been a huge variety of stuff that's been going on and different ones. Currently, I'm working on a game that's due to come out in the next kind of 8 weeks, which is a 2-hour experience, which takes it more from this escape / do not escape and more into this kind of getting involved with a narrative that changes based on decisions and stuff like that. But I'm going to talk a lot more about how kind of escape rooms are changing and how this also gives you from that perspective to bring it through, that it doesn't just have to be escape or not escape. You can actually look at many different mediums that might go a lot better with work like what they've been talking about before me. So the kind of goal that we're speaking here was to show how a workshop escape room might be for public engagement / undergraduate teaching in relation to these themes, but with the hope and expectation that these ideas become transferable to other topics. What I'm going to be focusing on today will be no theory, just real world usable content, and seeing the kind of practice that I do in my day-to-day job and how you guys might be able to use that. I thought I'd start off by telling you who does play escape rooms, because I think that the market that we have typically crosses over quite well with your audiences. That you can see there that kind of 18 to 44 is really the huge taking over half of the market, and even when you get to 45 plus, it's still 15% more people who are over 45 play it than are under 18. Very split male and female. The only difference that we find from kind of an escape room perspective is that about 70% of the bookers are female, but we find the players, there's a really, really good, strong, even gender mixture there. What makes a good escape room? So one thing that's really important about this is that when people cite what makes a good escape room, it's always focusing on the puzzle aspect. And especially now the kind of escape room industry has developed so much, there are a lot more barriers to entry, which involve like the use of technology. But if you look on that diagram, technology really isn't cited as that amazing thing. Story and immersion, however, are the second two. All of these things I've got some easy tips that can help people to create these on a real low budget, as opposed to looking at everything that has to be a kind of 100 to 200,000 investment, which makes it a lot more transferable to the likes of stuff that we're going to be talking about today. When it comes to preferred escape room lengths, and it is worth saying that a lot of this information comes from enthusiasts who are people who are very, very, very into escape rooms. Now, your audience might not be quite so into escape rooms as these people are. So it's worth noticing when it's like the average preferred escape room length of 88 minutes. For me, I would say with normal people who are doing this for the first time, an hour is more than enough. But that does just show that you can do longer. The interesting part as well to kind of note here is that 20 minutes is the preferred minimum length. Now, I think that if you're going to take escape room concepts and you are going to put them into something in the classroom or something like that, you really want to focus on doing a tabletop game as opposed to trying to turn the whole classroom into something where everybody could get involved in it with an actual classroom escape room, because the number of players there is just far too many. What we normally find is 4 is the ideal team size. Most of my escape rooms are always aimed at 2 to 5 players. I have designed some that aim at 18, and they work very, very differently. And what we've actually found is in these 18-player escape rooms, so teams of 4 do just as well, if not better than teams of 18 a lot of the time. So I think that unless you're going to really work on a concept that's really different, try and aim for the ideal team size of 4, just because it's the easiest one for you to design an escape room for. I thought I'd mainly focus on design here because that's what I do for a living and it's what I can share with you guys the best. So I wanted to start by talking about the theme, and obviously, as Helen was talking a lot about, we have the premise of be a traveller from the blazing world imprisoned in the 17th century England and determined to escape back. Okay. The first thing that you need to think about here is location. Whether you're going to have a bricks and mortar escape room, whether it's going to be mobile or outdoor. In mobile, I include anything that's a pop-up, so that could be a pop-up in a classroom or something like that. And then obviously through COVID, we've had online escape rooms popping up left, right, and centre. Can be really good, can be really engaging, but personally, that's something that I've chose to steer clear of because the market just became flooded by them, and there's been loads and loads. Doesn't fit with my kind of ideas on what makes a good escape room. Another one that I've designed recently was for the Royal Army's Museum, and this actually was launched 2 weeks before COVID struck, which was really sad. So I've not actually had as many people go through this. Now, what was interesting about this concept that I'd like to share with you is here we have 4 weapons from the museum. Stage 1 of the game was kind of a treasure hunt through the museum where you had to follow maps and clues in order to find each of these weapons in order to unveil a code which would get you into a secret door within the museum where it was actually for their make-believe exhibition. So it was focused on kind of not so much history, but like it was where they had the gun from, say, Alien, they had swords from Lord of the Rings. So there's a lot more kind of fantasy based, and you got a secret code and opened the door, and then you're into a small, it was actually a 20-minute long escape room where you had to kind of defeat an evil alien and you got laser guns to shoot away his tentacles and stuff like that. Yeah, but the point that I want to make here is that you can actually implement that in with other things like treasure hunts, and then have the escape room at the end as something that you can finish it off and that finish your mission. Okay, so yeah, that brings me on to goals. So commonly the goals in escape room, and these are some of the first ones that I made, these are probably about 5 years old now. The goal is escape in the quickest time possible. And you can tell that from the certificates from our games. The game that I'm currently working on in the minute has completely changed that. This is a wizarding game, and this is your wizard report card that you get from completing it. I've tried to design this game so it has different narrative paths, and it is replayable over 4 times, where you could go and do different things, meet different characters, find different information, make different choices, choose a different path, and also there are side missions and special artifacts that you can get. All of these choices affect the narrative, affect what spells you can learn, affect what kind of wizard you become, and also the state of the wizarding world at the end after you've left it, and the changes that you've made to this kind of imaginary narrative. Now, what I'm trying to show there is that the goal can be anything. It can be to get treasure, it can be to escape, which is normal. I've even done ones where you have to kind of warn off spirits by doing a ritual. It's always worth having that in mind. Now, our goal is somebody from the world of the Blazing World, sorry. Here they'll be imprisoned. So one thing that's really obvious to me is that they're going to have to break out of prison. They're going to have to find themselves a ship in order to get home, or a submarine, and they're also going to have to charter their way through the kind of North Pole regions and the Blazing World. One other important thing to think about with an escape room is how you guide players through the game. I've done this in many ways. A very common way is a book, or a magic book, where they must follow the kind of steps in the book, and this works as to push through the narrative. Very commonly, you have a breadcrumb trail sent by another character, and that'll be like finding notes that they have left from the past, and you disseminate those notes, and that brings you through the game. You can have the character call you on the telephone, or in my latest wizarding game, I've actually got a Harry Potter-esque moving portraits of characters that you interact with through the game. Now, in this game, I think that a message in a bottle mechanic might work really well. You could use this to shine the difference between the 17th century England and the Blazing World. So we could use bottles sent from the character who you're asking the players to believe they are, that they've received from the Blazing World. Okay, how do we get to our goal? Many different ways of getting to our goal. I would always choose one of these based on who the players are going to be. I'd say if your players aren't going to be escape room experts, you want to keep it as simple as possible. Kind of linear sequential game. Normally, my games that are designed for first-time players are always sequential, just because the first time you play something like this in this kind of medium, you don't really understand what's going on. It takes you a long time to kind of get to grips with what kind of information you've got to look for, where you've got to search, and all of this kind of stuff. And then I'd say that the second time you will play it, path-based is nice. It's nice to give people a variety of different tasks that they can get on board with and bring it all together. And then, yeah, so pyramid is something that I use as well. But each of these kind of structures I put down to the expertise of the gamers. Open for starting off with people a lot of the time can be a bit confusing, because there are too many stimulus around, too many different things that they can get started with. So yeah, that's always worth noting when you start to design a game. Now, when I plan a game, I use this interactive open source software called Twine. It looks just like kind of basic flowchart software, But the reason why this works really well for me is because I can plan my game in here. This, for the example, is at the start of my Wizarding game. Everybody does a Wizard aptitude test before they join their school. And let's look at this almost like a sorting hat to make things nice and easy. Each player would get a different wand that has different powers depending on how they answer this quiz. And the start of the game, they have a token which they present to this wand master, and the wand master will then give them a wand depending on which token is presented. So when I read this, when I write this down in this narrative function, I can write in red what happens from the tech side. So the person who I'm briefing on the technology side knows what's happening. I can write in purple what the narrative will be doing. And then at the end, I can give it a click through. Now, what ends up happening with this tool is I actually end up with a playable text-based version of my escape room, which I actually use for really early testing. So before I actually put any money into developing this kind of large-scale game, I've already been able to test this out. This also means that before you go through and you bring an idea into a classroom or you start looking for funding, you actually have a kind of tangible click-through adventure that you can see, play, and share as part of your escape room. Okay, yeah, I thought that either a path-based or a linear path-based, where you actually go for different paths in a linear fashion, would work really well for this game. That's because each path could represent a different animal or mythical creature and their own area of expertise, with the final puzzle combining all these skills together to guide the prisoner home. So you'd have a maths puzzle based on the spiders, and you'd have kind of science puzzles based on the bears, so on, so forth. Next, I thought it'd be nice to talk about the kind of different generations of escape room that we've had, and how we can kind of take learning from this and make it transferable and add it across and hopefully come up with something that you guys can use. So originally in the first generation, it was all about puzzles. And as we saw earlier in that graph, puzzles are still cited as the most important thing in the escape room. And I really, really think that if you get your puzzles really nicely, people engage with it no matter what because of the joy of solving puzzles. In the second generation, it started to get more thematic. People were spending a lot more money on not only making the place look good and feel realistic, but also integrating their puzzles. So instead of it just being sheets of laminated paper, you then started to get stuff that appear kind of in props and more integrated. We find that people engage with this a lot more because it feels like they're getting immersed into the story rather than they are just kind of doing a worksheet. Then loads and loads of money started being spent on technology in escape rooms, but from very padlock based to everything being based on electromagnets. Now, I've got some simple tips and tricks that can add something like this on at very low budgets. But as most of this is custom made, I'm not going to talk about this very much today. Generation 4 and 5, for me, only costs creativity. And that's the kind of thing that you can actually do with next to no external budget, unlike putting technology or Generation 6 augmented reality. So I'm not even going to step on today because that's where you're really starting to get high budgets. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Generation 1 and 2 together. And because Generation 1 for me, just making puzzles is something that I can share some tips with. But also while I'm talking about this, I'm going to talk about how we can make it more thematic and we can make it more engaging and we can get people kind of lost into these ideas a little bit more. So commonly, one major thing in escape rooms is to search and find at the start of the game. And you can imagine how this would work in a physical escape room because you have lots of props, you have lots of a physical environment for people to react with. Now, if you take this into a classroom environment or tabletop environment, you don't have that physical environment. But there are lots of different things you can do to this. One is diversion safes, which we use quite a lot. and they are things that look like objects, but secretly they have something hidden inside. You can imagine, like, for example, that tin of, is it, sorry, I can't see, corned beef hash, but it's easy to get a label and to put some double-sided sticky tape and make that anything that you want that comes in the tin. But I thought really what would work nicely if we were to take the Blazing World and put that into a tabletop game is to have a diversion lock or safe for each of the races in the Blazing World that educates players on each of the races. The next thing that's really, really common in escape room, especially in generation 1 and 2, are padlocks. There are so many of these. And a lot of the time you see places that just go for a standard key lock that looks like that. Now, if we're pretending we're in the 17th century, we don't want to buy a 17th century padlock, because if that breaks, then your game would be ruined. But on the market, there are lots of different key locks available. And just by getting a key lock that looks a little bit more like it fits in with that era, people will suspend the belief a lot more. Now, across here, I've just got some different examples, because I thought not everybody's going to be looking and taking this into the 17th century. So other ideas. And the same with these kind of book safes. You can easily re-sleeve that to be anything you want. We also have number combination locks. Same again. If you do want people to suspend disbelief, if you do want them to really engage with your topic, then don't just go with something that looks like it can be bought from anywhere in modern day England. You can find these locks, and they're really, really easy to find just with a few Google searches, easy to buy, so if they break. So I would use that lock for this project. But if you're going to do a safe crafting project, something like that, or also when I spoke about delivering clues for a message in the bottle, you might not want them to have all these clues accessible to them at the start of the game. So one of the rewards for solving puzzles could be to unlock a clue which had a kind of message in a bottle with a code on it, like that one. Word combination locks, this is another one that you'll definitely be using. These are always so kind of riddle answers, or if you want someone to find a place, or you want someone to get involved with your narrative. Yet again, there are loads of options available to make these a lot more thematic. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say on that one, really. Directional locks are also commonly used in this generation 1 and 2. These don't come themed. However, whenever I like to put them into a game where I don't feel that they fit, I like to at least have some kind of tie to make it seem like they are there. One method that I saw in the Blazing World is that the human populations often have different metallic-ish skin colours. So I don't know whether you'd be able to link something like that, but that's definitely kind of avenue that I would look towards. Ooh, puzzles. Okay. So here I have ranked by puzzle type what the most popular puzzles are to be used in escape rooms. Logic puzzles come up top in Western Europe, communication challenges, also maze to objects, dexterity, riddles, so on and so forth. What I say is really important to keep people engaged and to keep people playing through the game is try to keep a nice variety of stuff like this, and also to try and theme it to whatever they're trying to solve or get to. In this case, what I would do with the Blazing World is start to look at each of those kind of races, mythical beasts, animals, etc. And I'd like to put a certain type of puzzle towards each one that the heroine intercepts in her journey. And that would create a really nice way of sharing the narrative from the book, but also making sure that the escape room is balanced and has lots of different kinds of puzzles in there. My common design mechanic for escape room puzzles is to make the goal obvious, what they've got to achieve, to create an assumption so the players think that it's easy, they know the answer, they're going to do it straight away. Then to catch them with a catch where they realize that the obvious answer isn't the obvious answer. So they have to go back, they have to look around the room, they have to research, they have to read through all the text and information that you have provided before they come to the actual solution. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, these are very kind of conventional escape room puzzles. I didn't want to push the boat out too much because I find that if this is going to be something that's not aimed at people who haven't played that many escape rooms, it's not going to be aimed at trying to kind of blow people's minds by next level puzzle design. What you really want here is something that's engaging, that people can get on well with. I find that the classic methods of puzzles people can engage with a lot faster and easier because they are classic methods of puzzles. Whereas whenever you try to do anything a lot more out there, it takes people a lot longer and it's not as easy for them to kind of digest and engage with. So I've stuck to basic stuff to talk about today, really. Here we have ciphers, and there's classic Caesar cipher. What I would like to do with this is take a themed cipher that uses the code messages sent by the player's ally through the bottles, ensuring that the players properly engage with information. So you use a chalkboard for them to write out any information that comes through the bottles. The really good thing about this is because you're making it fun and because they're interacting with the information, they'll spend more time reading it and more time making sure that it's right. And yeah, I always find that's really well, because then the whole team is communicating over this one thing and getting involved with your stories. I use this quite a lot in my escape rooms, just because a lot of the time players can be a lot more focused on the puzzles themselves than the narrative. So by doing this, I kind of force them to get involved in the narrative, which always works well. Maps. Maps are always really good, especially in this escape room, because her journey did involve, in the Heron's journey in the Blazing World, did involve kind of going to all these different places and getting an idea of this world. So I think there's got to definitely be a map element in this escape room. They could have a plot a path of the ship to the Blazing World. Information on each of the animals / mythical creature societies could hold clues to which ports connected with other ports. This is something you could easily put into a directional lock, with each direction as they kind of go through the map ending up to be a code, which would then get them some kind of reward or get them into a box that would further on the story. Next kind of puzzle I want to talk about, physical challenges. If they're stuck in a prison, you'd have the classic stuck behind bars and the key is out of reach. Now in this escape room, I wouldn't do that. I'd actually have that as my assumption, and I'd have them try and get some keys that wouldn't work or were the wrong size or something like that. One thing that I was interested in here is that when the Heron comes back to the when she comes via submarine back to her own world, she comes with this thing called Firestone, which she uses as a bomb-like substance. And I think it'd be really nice to kind of start incorporating your story from the get-go and use this to get the prisoners to escape from their prison bars and just blow the bars off. This is something that I personally do with technology, but you could do with kind of coded locks and stuff like that. Generation 3 into the kind of technology side of escape rooms. So currently, a lot of this is custom made. A lot of this is straight off the shelf. In this Wizard game, I've created these wands, which are like infrared sensors. So they'll be the same as kind of like your television remote or something like that. Depending on which movement you make with these wands, can cast a different spell. But as you can tell, that kind of thing is like massive budgets. I've had like 2 programmers working on this project for over a year now, and that's not really accessible to everybody. Things that are accessible to everybody at low budgets, and this is actually the controller that's from one of those. These are plug sockets that by the push of a button you can turn on and off. These always work really well if you're going to kind of operate an escape room that's done at a really small budget, or you've got a group and you just want a cheap, easy wow effect where you just press a button and it would play a sound effect. It could make something drop. It could turn on the television. It could do whatever you can find that plugs into one of these switches. The other thing that's notable is you can buy these kind of pre-built escape room electronics kits, which would allow you to add in that additional wow factor and kind of integrate your puzzles a lot more with technology. These are always worth having a look at if somebody does have a little bit more budget to share with their projects. Generation 4 storyline integrated escape rooms. Now, I've brushed over this already because this is actually, for me, one of the first things I do when designing an escape room. So how narrative is delivered to the players. I use very similar techniques to how I deliver clues, because any character, any book, anything like that through there can be used to thicken the plot, add twists to it. These external characters through a variety of different mediums. But it's something that for me I focus on from the very, very get-go, because I think that it's really essential. And as we said before, we can integrate them through kind of message in a bottle technique, making the narrative a reward for finding out pieces of information. One of the main things that I find why people really engage with escape rooms and why people really enjoy them is because in the escape rooms, there is a lot of effort made suspending people's disbelief and letting them think that for an hour, for 88 minutes, for 20 minutes, that this is the world that they are in and this is real. And that's a really, really, really important thing for me. I have some really easy tricks for this. I use dark corridors quite a lot. So before people go into their games, they'll be, to forget the world they came from, I'll put them through a dark corridor, or I'll blindfold them. Blindfolds often reset people and they get them to start from the start. Actors can also be used for this, as long as they're good actors, which they're not always. Characters, videos, lights, sound effects, and music. I mean, if you did something in a classroom where you're asking somebody to believe that they're in prison, nothing like putting on a dimmer light and changing the music.
I think, Aaron, are you there? Probably you froze.
Tom,
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Adam and Thomas? Yeah, I think Aaron froze.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got you guys. But we've lost Aaron, I think. Yeah.
Oh well, he'll be. I'm sure he'll just be back in a minute with the.
Oh, what a shame! It was
Enjoy.
really exciting.
It looks really, really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah, this is fascinating, actually.
It's actually quite feasible.
Yes, it is feasible.
You know, without a huge budget, and some of the, ironically, some of the skills that we've been working on to do some of the other stuff.
Welcome, Isabel. Lovely meeting you.
Hi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for joining
Sorry,
us.
I was late. I messed up with the time. I thought it was at 2, not at 1:30.
No, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe this is part of the mystery of the escape room, no? That he disappears.
Have you ever been to an escape room? Any of
No.
you?
Yeah.
No.
You have, Adam? How was it? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was really interesting to see the different dynamics of, like, I was with 4 people. It was my, well, now ex-wife, but and my mum and dad, and it was like me and my dad used to like persevere with stuff, but those two just throw in the towel. They'd just be like, oh, screw this. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, but you're both intelligent people. Well, my ex-wife is smarter than my mum, but you know, it's just like, and I'm just like, I didn't expect that from you. And you see a different character from certain people, like that you wouldn't expect.
Do you think that's connected with the suspension of disbelief? Because obviously, if you can more readily suspend your disbelief, you could put, if you just think, oh, it's just an escape room, who cares? But if you can sort of really engage with the, you know, step into the world, you might be more inclined to give it a good go.
I think they're both people that were just like, sort this. And then if they couldn't sort it in like I don't know, whatever, 2, 3, 4 minutes. They're just like, oh, right. That was it. I'm just going to go and sit in the corner with a towel on my head.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was quite an eye opener actually, because like me and my dad were battling away, and it was just like,
I must admit, I really want to have a go at the one in the Royal Armouries that he was talking about at the beginning. That sounds amazingly cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could have a trip there quite easily, couldn't we?
We should seriously have a field trip to Leeds. We should go and try it out. That would be amazing.
I would very happily do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Can we have a funded field trip, Javier?
Yeah, we need to do it. People from Nottingham-Trent, from Manchester. Isabel, where are you based?
Bristol.
At Bristol. Well, then we'll have to, to bring you up north.
Yeah, Leeds is a bit more of a trek for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, but this should. Yeah, I was just so.
We have here the story of the pirates. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, we have a a tour in the city where the pirates used to hide the treasures and these things.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite interesting city.
Yes, Great Britain would make an amazing venue for something like this as well.
True, that's true. Yeah, very good thinking.
I just like Aaron is back. Good news.
And in disguise still.
Can I just nip off for 30 seconds?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Needless to say, many thanks.
I'm going to do the same, actually. 30 seconds.
Okay, yeah, have a comfort break, guys.
Hi, Aaron. Welcome back.
Yeah, very sorry about that. It's a very
No, this is part of life. We were all saying here, we are so thoroughly enjoying your presentation. We were gutted this happened, but we're delighted to have you back. Do you want to put your slides on once again?
Yes, I think I'll have to take over as host again.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased that it didn't just kick us all out, because that's...
Yeah, so am I.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, very sorry about that.
Let's see. Come on, behave yourself, computer.
Yeah.
Ta-da. Okay.
That's great,
Yay.
Aaron. The floor is
Yay.
yours again.
Great.
Blazing Saddles. Is that deliberate?
No, that is not deliberate. That's just probably dyslexia coming in a little bit.
It's quite sweet. The reason I know is that my father has never stopped taking the my class of his parents, who apparently went to see that film believing it was a serious Western.
Okay, we're nearly here. Oh, that's the exact one that I'm on.
Yep, that was where we were.
Yeah, luckily it was one of those ones where I noticed straight away and I didn't carry on talking for 10 minutes before. How do I go straight into that present? Yep, technology loves me today.
Welcome to my world.
Okay, so
Brilliant. We're back.
So I'm going to go straight back in for a little recap of where we were. So I was just talking about various methods that we could use to transport people from their reality to the world you've created. And in this we covered dark corridors, blindfolds, actors, sound effects and music as being a really easy one that makes a really, really big impression. And then smoke and all of that kind of stuff can also be involved. I really wanted to share some kind of golden tips that I use when designing, and these are stuff that I think are really, really important. And that's to make your entrance and exit to the escape room as different as possible. To make, even if this is a tabletop game, really make a massive difference between what is the start and what is the finish. If we were to make this kind of Blazing World game into a tabletop solution where you had to create somebody as a prisoner, you might want to stop them handcuffed to the table or something like that to give them that extra kind of feeling that they are a prisoner and it's not just whereas so in the exit they'd have their hands free, and that makes a big difference that you can easily do from a tabletop scenario. Drip feed information. A lot of the time, if you put too much information at once, people will read it faster, they'll skim it, they won't take any information in, they'll just be looking for buzzwords. One thing that I often do, even if I'm using a book to kind of show this big pathway, is I'll rip pages out of the book, and as they come through the game, they'll slowly be able to put the book together to get the whole story. This is just to stop them from looking at all this text and not engaging with it. Do not assume your players know anything, because as soon as you start assuming that anything that's needed to solve the puzzles in the game, you need to teach and educate them. And that's really, really important, because a lot of the time, I'll give you one example. We have a lift that takes someone to hell in the game I've got called the Devil's Playground. And there is a bit saying, enter his number and the lift will be fixed. His 3-digit name is, and to most people that riddle would say 666. But I've had people from different places, different backgrounds, that just would not know that, and I've had them stuck on that puzzle for most of an hour. So just really try to make sure you do not assume that your players know anything. Keep puzzles of a good difficulty level. Too easy and people do not engage with the information. Too hard and they will disengage. Really what we're trying to do is create this state of flow in the game where people are engaging with the content, they are stuck in, they're enjoying the puzzles, they're not scratching their heads, they're always working something out. And a really good way to do this is to start with easy puzzles and to make the game get harder and harder as they progress. And that really always works for me to create this kind of state of flow. I try and put a wow moment at the end of each room or puzzle that stands out to the players, creates a kind of change of state, something that they're going to remember, talk about, and yeah, this is just a, well, I think this is one of the main reasons why lots of people play escape rooms, in my own personal opinion, because they want that feeling, and that's a feeling that we can create. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I would do that and how I'd structure that in a room like this. So if we look at area 1, the prison, goal would be escape the prison with help from half of the team on the inside. So I'd like to do a kind of communication part where half of your team has information that the other half doesn't, half of them behind bars and half of them are in this kind of non-prisoner area. Puzzle structure, I keep things linear. I'll try and keep this as physical as possible. And my wow moment there would be using bombs to explode the prison bars. And these bombs would be taken from the book, the bombs that were brought back in the submarine. That would get you some idea of putting into the game where these bombs came from, how they came to be. And that's also introducing this idea of the Blazing World to the players. My second area would be a kind of detective area, or whoever is imprisoning them this. And what I would like to look at this for is that this game is created and is set after the heroine has come from the Blazing World. And you have somebody who's investigating where all of these kind of strange objects, strange relics, and strange people, which would be involving the characters are in the game, and where they all came from, and investigating into the Blazing World. This would allow us to share ideas of the Blazing World with the players, and you can do this through a kind of their own investigation notes and stuff like that. This would be really nice place to put in a kind of path-based model, because if you did that, each path could follow a different kind of mythical creature or animal, or different colored skins, human, and their kind of their own expertise and have that shown via a different type of puzzle, as we were talking about before. Then finally, I'd have them break out into the docks where they'd break into a submarine from the Blazing World. I'd probably make it the exact same submarine which the heroine in the Blazing World came in, using a piece of information learned from each species of the Blazing World. They could break into the submarine. So this submarine might have like a 3-4 part puzzle which encapsulates everything that they've kind of learned through the game to get inside, and then completing the game with a high moment of a submarine simulation, just to leave that wow factor at the end. We do it quite a lot. I've got a submarine game in Leeds and Sheffield where we have transducers, or kind of like big bass speakers built into a false floor. So when you get hit by a missile, the floors shake and stuff like that. You can do some really nice effects in places in this where the floor would shake to make it look like the submarine started moving, and then you can have kind of like 2 bits of perspex on the windows that fill with water, and that's for something that I do in my kind of line of work would be really cheap, because all it would be is just a kind of water tank that fills up, that's made to look like a window. But for an example, if you wanted to do this instead in a tabletop, you could have 4 or 5 different padlocks on a box, which could be kind of painted to look like a submarine or something like that. And opening each lock would bring in your thoughts from each of the different kind of civilizations that you meet through the game and the book. Finally, this is a kind of thing that I ask myself after every escape room that I design, because for me, these are the 4, and when I test every room, these are always 4 of the main questions that I'm asking players in the game. So I think after you finish designing your room or designing your challenge for people, to look at these 4 areas and see if you've got this, because I find that people get engaged the most when they have these 4 factors included. I always like to have at least 1 physical challenge. That can be anything from a kind of minuscule challenge where you could have things like the bears and the giants, all of them in kind of miniature form, and they could get involved with these physically and using their hands. Or it could be something where you're in a prison, you have to reach stuff that's far away. Just 1 physical challenge, just to make sure that not everything is paper-based or based in something like that. Emotional excitement, gripping storyline is always really, really important. Luckily with this, we've already got the gripping storyline of the book to work with. But just making sure that they're constantly being an evolving narrative, because I think a lot of the time escape room players see narrative as a reward for solving their puzzles. Intellectual stimulation, you don't want it to be too easy that they can just blitz through it and not have to think, not have to work together and not challenged. But at the same time, as I said earlier, just make sure that you're not making it too intellectual and stimulating. Otherwise, lots of the proportion of the game may get bored and stop interacting with it. Finally, skill enhancement. People like to feel like they are moving forward and kind of achieving something that their brains have been worked out, and it's stuff that's also transferable that comes into their life in general. And that's my kind of final tip for you with taking an escape room and making it something that you can kind of transfer into any subject, really, absolutely any subject. Hello?
Yeah, just wondered if you have to do interviews with me.
Sorry, I thought that my connection had dropped out there, so I was just answering to see if I got lost on there, because my internet did stop, but that was a different phone call. Very sorry about that, guys. So finally, I'd just like to finish by asking if anybody has any questions on that.
Aaron, could you please stop sharing the screen, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Would you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant. Well, let me thank you for such a stimulating talk. We have thoroughly enjoyed it, all of us, and it's been wonderful. I have a few questions, but I would like colleagues here to take the lead, because I know, Thomas, you mentioned you had a question before when we were in the break.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, and an area I know nothing about at all. I must confess, my kids once tried to persuade me to do an escape room, and I resisted on the grounds partly of cost, but also I got a sense of almost fear and claustrophobia because I wondered what it would be like, you know. So there was genuine kind of slight palpitation, kind of worry. I suppose my question is, coming from a position of complete ignorance, to what extent are the, and I suppose, to what extent you made the important point that assume that your participants know nothing, you know, you're coming in with a kind of clean slate, and I can really see that. Although I guess perhaps with maybe students or undergraduates, you might assume some knowledge and then build on that or incorporate that. But assuming no knowledge, to what extent are your puzzles and questions and tasks are provided? So you have provided to your players kind of notes and information and research and documents they have to dig through and all that, which obviously could be quite time consuming and so forth. And to what extent is it just kind of pure logical deduction? Because obviously, I suppose if you provide lots of information, it's more educative about, for example, the Blazing Worlds, and you can sort of introduce it and all that. But it kind of takes away from some of the zippiness of kind of pure thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and that goes down to that kind of trying to create that flow and that game flow. It's something that I work really hard towards. I think that one thing that's really good is doing it through a shared source. So if you have a audio clue which plays over and plays information to the whole room, so everybody's listening to the same thing, whilst, say, for example, they're entering a new room and searching around and looking for things, that's a really easy way to get information through without it feeling like it's too much. And then from then on, I always just try and do it as this kind of reward based. So I like to do bite-sized information or information after they've solved a puzzle, and then they kind of can sit back and they can take in all the information that they've found new, add that to the information they've had before, and then just keep drip feeding it like that at every stage, drip feeding them more information as opposed to giving them information overload at the start. I suppose is how I'd answer that.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thanks very much. Yeah, great.
That's brilliant. Any other questions?
That was really good. Well done. That was really good.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one thing I'm conscious about, particularly with undergraduates, is not wanting to do anything that's going to accidentally cause trauma. Because
not want to do anything.
Yeah, I know. I suppose, what kind of tips would you have to sort of try and make sure that you don't go too far and accidentally kind of cause someone to, you know, freak out, basically?
Yeah, I've dealt with my fair share of freakouts and escape rooms in my time, a lot of the time, yeah. One thing that we do, we have a waiver form before we play the game, so we can kind of talk to them and warn them about what's coming forward in the game. Now, I wouldn't say that you want to do something as official as a waiver form, but you might just want to do like a little snapshot where it's got involved what's going to happen in the game. Now, without giving too much away, but let's say, for example, that you are going to go for the idea where you handcuff somebody to a desk, to tell them that you're going to be handcuffed to a desk, and then people already know what they're kind of looking towards. We always have a walkie-talkie or a method like that, where even if the room operator isn't there, they always have a way that they can get in touch with whoever is operating the room. That means that we can get them out, all of our rooms, all of the doors in them open with a press of a button. But in your case, it might be worth thinking of a way where if somebody does feel wrong or bad, that you can just make it as easy as possible for them to leave this kind of imagined world you've created.
That's brilliant. I have a couple of questions, Aaron, for you. As I mentioned, thoroughly enjoyable presentation. I was very keen and very interested in this section of your presentation on the different generations. And obviously, Generation 4 was quite appealing to me, but I guess it's quite challenging in many ways. I was just thinking in terms of Generations 1 and 2, what is your experience in terms of how enticing people our students' age find those escape rooms? Do they really work for them? And very much related to that, I also would like to ask you, whenever Thomas, Helen and I have been running these games on many occasions, on the vast majority of occasions, our board games, we have really found students very engaging and interested, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable. But you also face on many occasions people's apathy. Then what are your tips in order to overcome the potential apathy of people who just find these escape rooms not that enticing as we do? And my final question is, you have highlighted on a couple of occasions the importance of striking the right level of difficulty of the game. Then what are your tips in order to enable us to find the right level? Because I get it, if it's too easy, the students will find it very boring. If it's too difficult, they'll give up immediately. Then what are your tips on all these questions?
Okay, so the first one, when it comes to Generation 1 and Generation 2 escape rooms, a lot of customers that come through my doors, for example, and I've been there, I've made one of those escape rooms, I've made one of every kind, multiple, and I test a lot and I ask questions, and I have customers that have been from kind of day one, and they've been in the first escape room I've ever made, and they've been in the last escape room I've ever made. One thing that I recently did about 2 or 3 years ago was we had a site that was all put in this Generation 1, Generation 2, and then we also had this new site which would have been on like 5, 6, 7. I went back and redesigned the Generation 1, Generation 2 sites, but I didn't have the budget to bring them up to the Generation 6 and Generation 7. But as you can imagine, we have 2 in the city, we have 2 different centres which are massively different in terms of budget. Now I got really creative and got really into my puzzle design, and as I said right at the start of the presentation, people say that puzzles are the most important thing for engaging them in escape rooms. And what I found was, after I went back and I'd improved these puzzles that much, and I talked to customers through the game on these newer games and asked them kind of like, oh, we've played all of your games, and it's like, oh, which one's your favorite? I'd say that it was a surprising amount that would tell me that these 2.0 Generation 1 and 2 games that I've created were actually their favorites, because the puzzles were just so much more fitting and fun for them. So I really think if you're creative enough and you get that puzzle design right, I feel that the rest of it actually is kind of doesn't matter as much. But there is a difference in the fact that your question about people that are kind of hesitant to play these games and stuff like that. One of the main ones that I find hard are people that actually just don't like puzzles. Like, that's one thing that I find difficult, because some people don't like puzzles. And that's why I think that this kind of integrated approach, making them works really well in escape rooms, and why I try to make sure there is something for everybody. Because even if you don't like making puzzles, then you can kind of get lost a little bit in this world and look at these props and have things that move in cool ways and things to play with, or you can get involved in the narrative. Yeah, so it's really just thinking about making sure there's something in there for everybody, because I've had loads of people that, yeah, they sit down and they look bored, and there's nothing worse when you're testing a new game and you've got 3 or 4 people engaged and you've got one person sat there in the corner on their phone. So when I'm testing a new game, I really focus. If I find that one person who's sat on the corner playing on their phone, I get that one person who's disengaging, and I really focus when I'm doing my Q&A session afterwards. about why they weren't disengaging. What could I do to make this game engaging? So yeah, that's a major thing. And that also goes hand in hand with what you're asking about difficulty levels. Because I mean, if you go with something like undergraduate tech, for example, there is an assumed kind of level of intelligence and learning there. I'd also say that from there, you want to test these puzzles thoroughly and to ensure that it works. And you want to test it with your own market and make sure that the people which you're going to be putting this kind of challenge or escape room to are the people that you're testing with, and how they find the difficulty. Yeah, that would be my main tips on those 3 questions.
Well, this has been absolutely brilliant, a wonderful afternoon. We are all very grateful to you, Aaron, for, I'm also conscious that it's 3 o'clock now. But once again, thank you very much. And I would like to invite you all to attend and to join us tomorrow if you fancy, because we're going to have another workshop and now based in Manchester University. Then my thanks to NTU for having hosted us today. And Helen, would you like to say a few words before we go?
Only really just to echo the thanks. I was excited about this anyway, and it was even better than I expected it to be. I'm excited tomorrow where we've got John Dee and the Imprisoned Alchemist. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the thematic stuff about that. And yeah, thank you very much to everyone for joining us, and especially for Aaron for the fantastic input. Hugely appreciated.
All the very best. Take care now.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Aaron. Brilliant job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to follow up on anything that you've just heard and seen, you can find the links for the Great Escape Room website, the Centre for Rights and Justice at Nottingham Trent University, and the Aspect Network up on the screen now. As always, if you'd like to come to us with any questions or comments, you're really welcome to do so either via YouTube or our Twitter account, Balancing Beliefs @Law and Beliefs. Thank you very much.